Hello, everyone. I'm Scott Trumbo, and I will be your instructor this week. I want to talk about one of your assignments, the 8-step decision-making process. You've probably never heard of it, but I bet most of you use your gut and your instincts to make decisions most of the time. Author Herbert Simon refers to this as satisficing or heuristics. Satisficing is a fancy term which basically means you take the quickest, easiest decision that will do, and that's good enough for the situation. Sometimes, however, you have to use more than intuition. You have to use analysis, especially if the decision carries high risk, if it's something you're uncertain about, if you lack capacity, or if you just don't have enough information. So this assignment, the 8-step decision-making process, is going to be a new tool hopefully some of you can use back at your agencies. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. Okay, so this is what we're going to be looking at. These are the 8 steps. Identify the problem, frame the objective, research information, identify alternatives, make a decision, implement the decision, solicit feedback, and assess the results. If you open up your assignment in Canvas, you're going to see that you are the commander, and you have a personality conflict going on between your lieutenant and sergeant. Communication is being filtered to fit their individual agendas, and there's tension on the shift. So maybe some of you have experienced something like this happening in your own agencies. If you look at step 1, it's going to ask you to develop a clear, accurate, and brief problem statement that answers these questions. So at the end of the day, you don't know what's going on. You don't know what the root causes are. These are symptoms. And because they're symptoms, sometimes it's helpful to look at this from a physician's perspective. The first step of the 8-step decision-making process is identify the problem, and this is the physician model I just referred to. When did the problem start? Where? How? What are the symptoms? What's going to happen if we don't treat this? What could the problem lead to? Can you rule anything out? In your paper, list some specifics about what you're seeing, what you're hearing, and what the consequences are, and then you can move on to step 2. All right, step 2. Sometimes people get a little hung up here, and they're not clear. And what I want you to do is try to think organizationally about what overall you would like to accomplish. Some of you will write, or in the past have written, resolve the personality issue so the two can work together again. You may never be able to resolve their issue, and I want to be clear about that. So organizationally, what's the big picture? Are you trying to improve efficiency, improve effectiveness, restore harmony? What is your objective here? And write about it. In terms of your readings for this week, whether it's bounded rationality or using the rational model, are you trying to satisfice? Are you just trying to do something that's good enough? Or are you trying to optimize and have the best possible outcome? This is what we're talking about in step 2. Step 3, this is your bread and butter. We're all cops. We're used to being investigators. So what I want you to do in step 3 is I want you to detail your investigation into cause. Where are you looking? Where are you getting your information? What data sources will you look at? Will you do interviews? Will you do observations? Detail your investigation and then move into your fishbone diagram. Now this is what a traditional fishbone diagram kind of looks like. You'll see the main headings: management, manpower, method, mother nature, machine, material. You can use those subject headings if you'd like, but you can also use your own. I'm not really too preoccupied on limiting your creativity here, but the important thing is I want you to go deeper than just those main headings. Those main headings may be causes, but there's sub-causes underneath them. For example, if you came up with leadership, you could have sub-causes for things like personality, style, delivery methods in terms of communication, ego, capacity. There's all different types of subcauses. So that's what I want you to do. Be specific. If you need help creating a fishbone diagram, I will include a fishbone diagram template in your module this week. Here's another example of another way you can have a fishbone diagram, and this is what the template is going to look like, the one I include for your module. The most ideal way to handle step 4, identifying alternatives, is to describe the possible alternatives that you could have. You don't need to list things that are completely unrealistic, but I would like you to think of 3 or 4 minimally alternatives you can come up with. I don't want to give away the farm and tell you what those possibilities could be. That's up to you. But you can give a description on them. And for some of you, you can do a SWOT analysis if that helps. And a SWOT analysis is simply strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And that helps you think internally and externally to frame the problem. Going a little deeper, the things that are internally to your agency are strengths and weaknesses. And this is just a couple examples of things you could come up with. Opportunities and threats are external to your agency. And for some of you, you may not know how to think conceptually about what those opportunities or threats could be out there. So I want to give you another tool that you could use to think about those things. So this is what that looks like. This is a PESCO analysis. Political, economic, social, technology, legal, environment. You can Google this if you'd like, but I also include it in the discussion boards. It's just another tool to help you think dimensionally about what the nature of the issue is and how you can think about different avenues that your problem could be impacted by. I'll be candid with you. You don't have to put a SWOT analysis or a PESCO analysis in your paper if you don't want to. That's going above and beyond. That's if you're an overachiever. What I'm more interested that you do as part of the assignment requirement is to include a criteria matrix. So what is a criteria matrix? It looks like a chart or a table. What you're going to be doing is you're going to be listing all the possible alternatives on one row or column. Against that, you're going to come up with criteria that are important to making your decision. And that's going to differ for each of you. You're going to determine yourselves what is important to you. Is it cost? Is it receptivity by employees? Is it management time needed? Is it risk management? Things like that. So this is what a criteria matrix looks like without weighting, and I'll explain what that means shortly. In this example, we talked about a smaller agency thinking about coming up with their own SWAT team. So as you can see, along the left column, there's a bunch of alternatives of things they could decide to do. Status quo, using the county sheriff's SWAT team as they're currently doing, embed officer with the SWAT team, join a multi-agency SWAT team, or form your own SWAT team. And then along the top, you can see the the criteria that are important to reaching your decision. For this example, it was cost, the response time to respond to critical incidents, political acceptance, management time needed. And as you can see, there's some subjectivity here because you are deciding what the score is for each of those columns. Just using row 1 as an example, status quo, we're gonna assign it a 9 because according 1 being the least effective, 9 being the most effective. In this example, a 9 represents that it's the lowest cost. Therefore, it's the most attractive option for that column. So that's why it's a 9. If you formed your own SWAT team all the way at the bottom, it would be much more expensive. So therefore, the variable is a low score of 1. And then so on and so forth. Response time to critical incidents. If there's a county SWAT team, maybe they're going to be slower because officers and deputies are coming from all over the county to group up. Whereas if you had your own SWAT team, maybe the response time would be faster. So that's why 7 is a higher score for having your own SWAT team. This just gives you an example. You're going to be subjective, you're going to make your own ratings, and then you're going to total them. And the problem, as you can see here, is that we have a tie. When you don't weight your criteria, ties are much more likely. And if that happens to you, we'll talk about that in step 5, you're going to have to give more explanation as to why you picked one decision over the other. You're going to have to advocate for it. So option number 2 is to make a criteria matrix with weighting. And you can already see that the 68 jumps out as the most attractive or optimal choice. So the way that works is you see along the top, certain criteria have a weight of 3 and political acceptance has a weight of 1. What that basically means by weighting is you're prioritizing your criteria. In this example, the author felt that cost, response time, and management time needed to implement this were more important variables for them than the overall political acceptance. It wasn't that important, so that's why political acceptance has a weight of 1. So if you look below, it's the same scores from the previous example, but now you multiply those scores by the weight. And by doing this, you can create gaps and distance between the totals of your alternatives. And we didn't have a tie, like before we had a tie score here, 26 for option 1 and 2, but because we weighted and prioritized criteria, well now option number 1, the status quo, became the optimal decision. And sometimes that happens with your decisions. Sometimes doing nothing, the status quo, is the better option. In the next slide, I go into a little bit more explanation, and you can see that cost and management time were the most salient or important criteria to consider. When you do your assignment, the expectation is that you include a criteria matrix in your paper. In the next slide, I want to give you some common errors at the alternative identification stage. You can get information overload. If you're asking too many people for opinions, the issue can become pretty cloudy. So it's important for you to narrow your data sources to what's important. All right, so in step 5, you're going to make the decision. Now we talked about satisficing and optimizing. Here, you're going to pick from the alternatives from your criteria matrix. So I'm going to go back a minute. So if you recall the slide, it shows that option number 1 was the optimal choice. So if that's what you want to use in step 5, write down that you're choosing to optimize and why. Why did you pick that option? Some people will pick an option that wasn't the highest score. So that's not the optimum choice. That would be a satisfice decision. They did something that was a little quicker, maybe something that was easier, something that was good enough to handle that problem. If you choose an option that's not the optimal result, you're going to explain that you satisficed and then explain why. The important thing to remember is that make a decision. A decision is better than no decision, because if you don't make any decision at all, no learning takes place, other than you're a bad decision maker. These are some of the reasons that people make errors in the decision-making process. Holding out for the perfect decision, That's also sometimes referred to as analysis paralysis, failing to face reality, such as sunk costs, fear of embarrassment, fear of failure, going with the flow, being impulsive and rushing in, relying too much on intuition, which is important many times, but sometimes it can work against you. You're going to find in the next week's discussion board, escalation of commitment, that bounded rationality is usually the most common example of an escalation of commitment, a failure. Narcissism, paying too little attention to consequences. I think we've worked for some of those people. Overvaluing consensus, that's also a groupthink phenomenon, which will be discussed next week. Not following through, that's one of the biggest failings of supervision, failure to follow up. Escalation of commitment. I had to put this in here because it happens all the time. We make a decision, sometimes we get so much invested in something that's a bad thing, but we continue with it anyway. And we probably all had examples of that. In the FTO program, we've had recruits that sometimes don't do that well, but if we just throw more resources and time into the problem, maybe we can fix them. Some people can't be fixed. And then at the end of the day, you're looking at 6-7 months down the drain, and maybe you only had to have 3 months down the drain, but that's just an example. All right, step 6, implement the decision. So just like we had visual aids for the fishbone diagram and the criteria matrix, you're going to add this visual aid to your papers as well. It can be a table or a chart, and sometimes using the SMART paradigm is a helpful way for you to do this. So when you list out your tasks in your implementation schedule, it's helpful to use dates, not time frames. Like, don't say week 1, week 5, you'll do this, week 6, you'll do this. No, use dates because dates are more actionable than time frames. When you list each of your tasks for your implementation, it's helpful to identify a purpose underneath each task. So if you write, meet with sergeant and lieutenant, okay, that's a task, but why? Why are you doing that step? Maybe you could improve it by saying something like, meet with the sergeant and lieutenant to discuss strategies to improve their performance, things like that. All right, step 7, solicit feedback. Usually the people or the data sources you're looking at for this step are often the same data sources that you're looking to in step 3 when you researched cause. So now you can go to those same data sources and find out if there's any measurable progress. All right, so how are you going to do that? There's different ways. You can do it qualitatively. Qualitative information is information from observation. It could be through interviews. It's more subjective, okay? You can also seek results quantitatively. For example, you can look at data sources. Data sources could be things like number of reports, percentage of like crime rates. It could also be captured through surveys. You can survey staff and you can find out what's the percentage of people that think progress has occurred. So in your paper, write down how you are going to seek feedback and what data sources you're going to be looking at. I'll give you a little tip. Look at your step 4 criteria and measure those. Measure those for success or failure, and identify your thresholds for success or failure. If 80% of the organization feels like the conflict is not resolved, well, that's a result and it's measurable. How are you going to get that information? All right, so step 8, assessment and evaluation. So I kind of gave you a little hint just a moment ago. You're going to look at your feedback sources and describe in step 7 where you're going to get that information. Here in step 8, you're going to measure those step 4 criteria for success or failure, identify what your thresholds are, and then you could describe a plan B, or what you're going to do next if a failure threshold is reached. You're going to describe that. As some of you may have heard, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Truthfully, I hate that phrase because it makes me think about bean counters and people that look at stats to solve every issue. So I do try to emphasize that you should look at qualitative and quantitative information, just as you would, rate an officer. Are we going to just look at arrests, citations, number of reports, number of accident reports, or are we going to look at their quality contributions that they make, which are subjective and qualitative and factor in? So that's what I'm talking about here in step 8. I want you to identify what's important to you from your feedback sources, what are you going to measure, and what your thresholds are. This slide here has a lot of good hints on things you can do in your paper to identify just what I'm talking about. All right, so let's recap a little bit. Step 1 is a problem statement, and you're going to basically describe the symptoms. What's the problem? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What's the impact this is causing to your agency? You can invent these facts. Step 2, frame the objective. What are you trying to accomplish? What's the global end result, the optimum or satisfies outcome look like for you? What are you trying to achieve? Step 3, research the problem. You're going to start by detailing your investigation into cause. You're going to describe where you're going to go to find that information. After you do so, you're going to put a visual aid in your paper, the fishbone diagram. You're going to have main headings, which you can describe yourself, or you can use the ones provided in the example. But it's important to get more into the weeds and describe sub-causes underneath each of those main headings. So after your fishbone diagram, step 3, you're going to step 4, and that's going to be your analysis. Okay? What that is you're going to identify your alternatives. You can describe them in a narrative first, if you'd like. You can also describe the criteria that are important to reaching your decision. But the requirement for the paper is to include a criteria matrix. And you're going to list in one column your alternatives. And along the top row, if you choose that method, you can list all your criteria. Now, again, recapping, you can weight them if you'd like. Weighting does help. It helps prevent ties. It also shows the reader what's important to you, what you prioritize, and helps them more fully understand your analysis. Step 5, make the decision. Are you choosing to optimize, or are you choosing to satisfice? If you're choosing to satisfice, that's okay, but explain. Why didn't you choose the optimum decision? Advocate for your decision. Step 6, implementation. This is your third visual aid. You're going to put all your steps needed to implement your decision into a chart or table. Okay, you're going to put a time date on that. You're going to describe the task. You should explain what the purpose of each task is. You should also identify who is going to be involved. Are you delegating this to a subordinate supervisor, or are you doing this yourself? Who are you meeting with? So list all those things in your table. Step 7, feedback. So you're going to describe where are you going to get information. Are you doing this qualitatively or quantitatively? Where are you looking? It's probably going to be similar to step 3, same data sources. Step 8, assessment. You're going to assess your results. You're going to look at your data, your information that you've taken from step 7, and you're going to assess it. You can do this qualitatively, subjectively, or you can, that's through interviews, that's through observation, just to recap that, or you can do it quantitatively. You can look at data, metrics, you can do surveys, and you can look for things like numbers, percents, dollar signs, and you can chart where things are. And I didn't include this before, but earlier in the process, in step 4, it's good to capture a baseline, capture what is. So when you get to step 8, you can now capture what happened and then compare that to step 4 and chart progress. You can chart distance, you can chart direction. What I mean by that, directions, is it going up or is it going down? And then distance could just be how heavily it's gone that direction. Like 90% is bigger than 10%. That's what I mean by distance. So that's what step 8 should look like. Identify your thresholds for success or failure, and you're going to have maybe plan B or C waiting in the wings if your plan A didn't work. So that's about it. That's the 8-step decision-making process, and I look forward to reviewing your work.